go to this afterwards. With the housekeeping out of the way, I just wanted to give a very brief overview of what you can expect from the webinar this morning. It is a 90-minute webinar, and we wanted to provide an opportunity for participants to find out more about the Misconduct Disclosure Scheme and how organizations can use it for safer recruitment. And in a moment, I will hand over to Ines, and who will talk about sort of the principles of the scheme, how organizations can go about signing up, how organizations can actually implement it, sort of what that requires, and what it means in practice, I guess. And Ines will speak for about 30 to 40 minutes. And then after that, we will have a 30 to 40-minute Q&A session. And then we'll bring the webinar to a close. If at any point, as I said before, at any point during the webinar you have a question, either save it until the end or write it in the chat box where I will be picking it up. You can also use the raise hand function. I hope you've all seen this at the bottom of the participant list. If you have any sort of concerns or anything, then do raise your hand and I'll come to you. So without further delay, I'm just handing over to Ines. Ines, I just made you a host, so I hope you can take over from here.
Hi everyone, thanks so much, Francisca. I hope you can hear me okay. Thanks so much for the introduction, Francisca, and thank you so much everyone for joining us today. I would just like to start with saying thanks so much to Bond Network and to Francisca especially for organizing and hosting this webinar. It's a great opportunity to further promote the scheme. Let me see if I can share my screen. I hope you can see it all right. Right. So as Francisca said, I would like to start with introducing the scheme. I will talk briefly about the scheme itself, where have we got so far, what do you have to do to sign up, and then I will move to the implementation of the scheme. I will also touch on the legal challenges, and then we will open the floor for questions and answers. So let me start with briefly introducing the SCHR itself, which is hosting the scheme. The SCHR is a voluntary alliance of 9 of the world's leading humanitarian organizations, namely Save the Children, CARE, ICRC, IFRC, Oxfam, Caritas, Lutheran World Federation, and I'm sure I'm missing someone. So the Misconduct Disclosure Scheme has been developed by the Alliance and other civil society organizations to address the issue of abusers moving between organizations. The scheme itself aims to improve the referencing practice by exchanging information related to staff who have been found to have committed sexual harassment, exploitation, or abuse during their employment. So, excuse me, why the scheme? So, as everyone probably knows, sexual exploitation and abuse has had a huge and ongoing impact on NGOs and their ability to respond to humanitarian needs. So SCHR identified that the movement of serial abusers and the idea to improve the recruitment practices is something that SCHR and the scheme could support in stopping. So I would like to talk a bit more about the scheme and how it came to exist. So the scheme was created in 2018. It was launched in January 2019. Initially, we had 16 signatory organizations. And for the first year of the scheme, so that was the 2019 calendar year, We've been looking at the implementation. We've been asking the first signatory organization to talk more to SCHR about challenges and just their experiences with implementing the scheme, as it was a new project at this time. The scheme is linked to other efforts in the sector, such as Interpol Pilot and the Humanitarian Passporting Scheme. It also complements other processes, such as police checks, because not all perpetrators have been disciplinary processes. So the scheme can pick up some individuals who were not prosecuted. And the ambition of the scheme is to cover all staff in position of power, which will probably take us some years to achieve. So let me move to what the scheme does. So the scheme is supporting sharing the misconduct data between employers. It consists of two main commitments: to systematically ask for the references and for the misconduct data when you are employing new staff, and also to answer such requests when they are coming to you from other participating organizations. The scheme also respects data protection and employment law. I will talk in more details about legal issues later in the presentation, because this is very important, and this is unfortunately to some extent hampering implementation in some countries. The scheme is aiming to help organizations make better informed decision when it comes to employing new staff. And as a result, it protects staff and beneficiaries. Sorry, I have some pop-up notifications, apologies. So the scheme doesn't blacklist or whitelist people. It also doesn't make the hiring decision for you. You will still need to make your own decision based on the information you've received, because as SCHR, we don't have access to any misconduct information. This is something that's being shared between the employing organization and between the referee. So this the scheme was established like that to avoid some data protection issues. And I will also talk about this a bit more later in the presentation. And also just to emphasize that the scheme is not a substitute for other measures related to PSEA. This is just an additional tool which should be used in addition to other tools which you might already have in place in your organization. So what we are trying to achieve by using the scheme and by encouraging others to sign up is that when we have agencies sign up to the scheme and then share the misconduct data, which enables other organizations in turn to make better informed decisions. This is leading to stronger legal or practical case for sharing such data. And then more organizations will become confident that this is legally and practically fine, and they can do that. So this will in turn lead to even more agencies signing up. And as I've said before, the ambition of the scheme is to cover all staff in positions of power, so that we can really make sure that the abusers are not being employed. Sorry. And before we move to how to sign up and implement the scheme, I would just like to give you a brief update of what happened so far. So right now we have 22 signatory organizations. So far, checks are not systematic because there is a tendency for organization to start implementing in one part of their organization. So very often this is, for example, the secretariat, because it's much easier. And you will learn more when I will talk about the implementation. But although the scheme requirements are not adding a lot of work for you, this is still something that needs to be checked and implemented properly, and also checked if it works for you, or if you perhaps need to look into other solutions how to make it work. So the tendency is to start in one part of the organization and then gradually move to cover all affiliates or family members, depending how you call them in your organizations. So even though the checks so far are not systematic, the response rate is very good, with more than 72% of data requests being responded to, which in the 2019 impacted on almost 3,000 recruitments. The signatory organizations requested the misconduct data more than 2,900 times, and also provided more than 2,100 sets of this misconduct data. And this all resulted in 34 applicants being rejected at the final stage of recruitment. And this happened either due to negative or absent misconduct data. Very often there are gaps in the CVs which the candidate is not able to explain. And this led to those 33 applicants being rejected. So now I would like to talk more about how your organization can sign up to the scheme. So there are some things you should check before signing up to the scheme. You need to make sure that your organization can implement the scheme and that you can provide some implementation data. So what it means in practice is that you need to be able to ask for references using the statement of conduct. I will explain more details shortly. And also, and also implementation data. I will explain this in more details as well, but this is very basic. At this moment, there are no subscription fees or other costs associated with signing up to the schemes. And you will be asked to provide some additional contact details. Some of them will be published on the SCHR website. Some of them are available only for other signatory organizations to make sure that we have the ability to facilitate peer-to-peer exchange, or that we can, for example, create some sort of legal task force to support us with responding to some questions, as very often the organizations who sign up to the scheme are working in the same countries. So it's much easier to exchange information and make sure that we are working on this together than for each organization to go through the same process. So if you think that your organization could sign up to the scheme and that you could use the statement of conduct and request misconduct data, and if you would be willing to sign up to the scheme after this webinar or later on, you should contact schr@ifrc.org, and the email should come from the CEO or head of your organization expressing interest in signing up to the scheme. And later on, we'll follow up, requesting all information and helping you with implementing the scheme and making sure that you have everything you need to make this happen. So as for the implementation itself, so the scheme can be easily adapted to be a part of your existing referencing systems. We are using a document called Statement of Conduct, which can be found on our website. You can see it here on the slide. I hope it's not too small. So the Statement of Conduct includes the questions which are under point 3, 3.1 and 3.2. So why I'm saying that this can be easily adapted to be a part of your existing referencing systems, very often we found that organizations are already asking those questions. Maybe not all of them, but the majority. Also, to make it easier for you, we are allowing signatory organization to adapt the statement of conduct. So you can either use this separately and just send it together with your reference checks, or you can just cut the questions and paste them into your existing reference forms. So this is totally up to you. And we are supporting each organization after after they sign up to the scheme and answer some questions, we can provide some templates to make it easier for you. What you need to remember while using a statement of conduct is that as a minimum, the misconduct history must be disclosed at all times, obviously when this is legally possible, and I will talk about that later on. Also, the question 3.2, which refers to the ongoing investigation, is optional because very often this is not really, it's not possible due to the labor laws to ask this question or to answer it. And you also need to clearly state the definition of misconduct your organization is using. Except for the commitment to request and share misconduct data as outlined in the statement of conduct, which you can see, SCHR also is asking you to monitor and submit implementation data. We are using it to make sure that we as SCHR, since we can't see the statement of conduct and we are not involved in the reference checks at any point, it helps us assess how the scheme is doing. And it also, based on that, we can see if the scheme is working. So you have seen that we had 34 candidates who were rejected, and that makes us confident that the scheme is working. So what are we asking you to monitor is the number of recruitments which you are conducting in each calendar year, the number of requests for misconduct data you are making in each calendar year, and then the number of responses you are receiving, so that we can see if the organizations are responding to such requests. Because as we have only 22 signatories so far, and obviously there is much more organizations you will be recruiting from, it's good to see what is the reaction to the statement of conduct. We are also asking you to monitor the number of misconduct data responses you are providing to other organizations, and the number of applicants who are being rejected based on the references you've received. So depending on the size of your organization, if you are a part of a smaller organization, this can be just a very simple Excel spreadsheet where you will monitor all the numbers. I know that some bigger organizations were looking into possibilities of generating it automatically from this recruiting software they are using. So I know there are some possibilities of how to monitor those numbers. And this data needs to be submitted in January each year to SCHR. And then the numbers are being published on the SCHR website. So if you go there now, you can see them. And in addition to those requirements, you should also look at what's needed from legal perspective. So let me move on and talk a bit more about that now. So as you have seen in the statement of conduct, we are asking for some sensitive data to be shared, which might have some legal implications. So if your organization is signing up to the scheme, you need to make sure that you are complying with data protection and labor law. So I would like to firstly talk about UK, because we have a bit more materials available for the organizations who are based in the UK, although I know that the majority is working also outside, so I will touch on it in a moment. So first of all, you can find a data protection impact assessment, which is following the UK format on our website. And you can use it to better inform your decision of legal risk while signing up to the scheme. And the scheme itself has been developed to be in line with the GDPR, because the data we are requesting is processed in a transparent manner. And we are only asking for the required information which are needed to inform your recruitment. And also we are encouraging all organizations to communicate that you will be asking for such data to the candidates at all stages of recruitment. And also it's worth, if you sign up to the scheme, it's worth sending a communication to all staff so they are aware that you are a part of this of the scheme. And when it comes to countries outside the UK, it's a bit more complicated when it comes to legal issues, because due to different labor laws, you may learn that it's not possible to implement the scheme in some of the countries where you work. So what we have tried to do as a CHR, we've collated and published on our website a legal framework, which is outlining the legal issues identified in some countries. So for example, due to the labor law requirements in Germany, we are not able to ask the questions in statement of contact. So we are looking at it, and we had a legal task force which was supporting us with looking what needs to be changed so that we can make sure that that we can ask for references using the scheme, but this is a work in progress. And you can see in the corner here just a small part of the legal framework, which is on our website, and you can access it. Just to say that the non-known does not mean that we've run a detailed legal check. It's just that the organization started implementing and we haven't heard about any issues. I would also like to emphasize that very often your HR teams or your legal teams in countries where you work will know actually what questions you can ask, because they are already doing some sort of reference checks. So they will be aware of what's possible. And as it says on the slide, the scheme is designed to be applied worldwide. But yeah, as I said, there are some legal challenges. So of course, if it's not legally possible to request or answer, that's I think more applicable, answer any questions in statement of conduct, you should state it in your response, because this is very helpful for hiring organization. And yeah, it's just important to keep in mind that we as a CHR might not be aware of some legal issues. So if you sign up and you found out about something that's stopping you, it will be massively helpful if you could share this information, because the scheme is still a new project and we are looking at improving it. And we would also like to facilitate more peer-to-peer support, because all organizations are basically doing the same, even if not to the same extent. It's just very similar. So in addition to the tools and information available on the website, we also have some additional information. We have the legal advice, which I've mentioned just now. We've also developed the how to implement guide, which is aimed at HR officers and staff who is directly involved in requesting references and answering the reference requests, because the scheme itself, I'm not sure if you've seen it, it's on our website as well. The language of the scheme is quite heavy. It was developed by lawyers, so we've been thinking that it might be much easier to translate it into more accessible language and make sure that it's easy to understand. So the how to implement guide can be found on our website. We also have some sample communication materials available from the existing signatory organization. This is not available for everyone, but if you sign up to the scheme, I can share this with you. Because as I said before, it's good practice to not only inform the candidates applying for work at your website that you are part of the scheme. It's also good practice to let everyone in your organization know that you have now signed up and what does it mean for them. We are also offering support with promoting the scheme if you have a network in which you would like organize a webinar such as this one. And we are also supporting organization with starting the implementation, because very often there are some questions, each organization is different. So if you need any help after you sign up to the scheme, we are here to support. We are also having a how to implement, the schemes registry, which is partly available on our website, and I would like to talk about this in a bit more details. So the scheme registry includes approved contact points. So when you are hiring someone from organization A, you can go to our website and look for the name of the organization and see whom you should contact. Because what we recommend is to include generic contact points for your referencing team. So it can be something along the lines of HR at name of your organization or references at name of your organization. And we need to have the authorized and approved contact points. And very often there is only one team or one person, depending on the size of the organization, who is giving references to make sure that they are approved and checked. The scheme also aims to allow signatories to update their own data. As I said before, the ambition is to cover all staff. So this is not yet in place because we are a bit delayed due to other issues. But the aim is that you will be able to access an online tool and update all contact information on your own, so that when something changes, there is no need, for the delay with sending me all the updated information and me putting them on the website. It just goes straight to the website. It also includes details of which part of organizations are currently implementing, because as I've said before, even though some of the biggest, for example, NGOs sign up, for example, Oxfam being hosted by Oxfam, Oxfam has plenty of affiliates. So when you say Oxfam is implementing, you might have the impression that the whole Oxfam is implementing the scheme. So to avoid the misrepresentation, we are listing on the website in the registry the parts of organization which are currently implementing. This also helps you to find the person to whom you should write if you need a reference, because very often it's just complicated to navigate and find out which affiliate or family member you should contact to request such references. And as I said, parts of this registry are published on the website. And that's why we recommend the generic contact points. Some parts of this registry are available only to our signatory organization. And this is because we are asking for some additional information, such as HR focal point, safeguarding focal point, or legal focal point, because as I mentioned before, we, for example, had a legal task force. So we've just asked the lawyers from some of the signatory organizations to come together and support us with looking at GDPR, at the national labor law, and just to make sure that we can answer some of those questions. So this is not being published anywhere. It's only for SCHR and for us internally for signatory organization to better exchange information, because, yeah, I've said it already, but the scheme is a new project and there is quite a lot of learning involved at this point. And we want to make sure that it's as easy as possible and that we can support you to the best we can, really. So as I've said before, the scheme is very easy to implement, but at the same time, we as a CHR recognize that it's not really only just adding those questions to your reference checks. There are some parts which you really have to address in your organization first, and you need to look in more details. What does it mean for you? Because, for example, even if there is no fee associated with joining the scheme, it might have some implications in resources for your organization or some other implications. For example, you might need more staff. You might need to spend more time on making sure that the staff understands how to approach the scheme and how to ask and give references. So as I said before, as CHR is more than happy to support you with that to some extent. We also have the materials, which I've mentioned on our website, which can be used to some extent, but of course, if there are any questions or answers, that's perfectly fine. And we are happy to have calls with organizations to answer those questions. And if you have any questions at all when we finish this webinar, or if you would like to receive more information after checking what's on our website, you can either maybe, I think the easiest will be to write straight to me. So you can see my email on the slide. As you can see, it says oxfam.org because SCHR is so tiny that we are being hosted by other organizations. So please let me know if you have any questions at all. You can also go to our website and there are various contact forms which you can use to contact us for more. And yeah, just let me look quickly. I think that covers everything actually which I wanted to share. So let me open the floor for questions.
Thank you, Ines. That's been really useful and a really helpful overview of the scheme. We had some questions come in while you were speaking in the chat function. So I'm just going to start with those questions. For everyone who's participating, if you do have a question that you would like to raise, I would like to ask you to use the raise hand function in the participant list, and I will come to you and unmute you so you can ask your question. If you prefer to just type your question in the chat, then please do so as well, and I will pick up the question. So the first question that we received in the chat function was a question on whether the scheme covers incidents of bullying and harassment as well, so not only sexual misconduct.
Thank you, Francisca. Should I take some questions maybe and answer them, or is there only one so I can't see?
There were three actually. So the other two questions were, is the analysis and the legal research that you mentioned, which shows that the scheme complies with GDPR, available, or can it be shared? And the third question that we got was, of the 34 cases that you mentioned, where recruitment was prevented at the final stage, do you have a breakdown between those for whom the information was negative, so where the reference came back negatively, and those for whom the disclosed information was incomplete?
Thank you so much. Right, so to start with the first question, it was about if the bullying and harassment is included. No, actually, at this point, it's not included. This was debated when the scheme was started because it's a very pressing matter and we recognize the need. But the final decision was to start with sexual abuse exploitation at first. And I've heard that there were also some legal issues when it comes to bullying because it's not always very easy to find the same definition. So right now the scheme is not covering that. And I have been asked this question and we've been doing some internal thinking about that because that's needed. And that's a very good question, but unfortunately we don't cover this at this point. And then legal analysis on GDPR. So I think that this is mostly included in it can be shared. I think it's actually on our website somewhere. So I will look for it and actually if it's possible, Francisca, I'm not sure if it's possible to share some documents and links after this webinar with all participants. I could include that as well.
Yes, absolutely. We can share that afterwards.
Perfect. Thanks so much. I'll just write a note to myself to include this. And then the breakdown for 44 cases. So no, unfortunately, I don't have such information. And while we've been following on some of them to just learn what was the decision and how it was made, we had no details because we don't have access to those information due to legal issues because it's not directly related to our work. So while we are often asking for case studies, which are anonymized, we don't have access to all such information. Although we recognize that we might need to do a bit more work on this and yeah, just ask for more cases based on that. But then again, the scheme is owned to some extent by the signatory organizations, not only as CHR, and we have no impact on the decision whatsoever. So that's why we don't have access to this.
Great, thank you, Ines. And the last question was the question on the breakdown. Was that where you said you didn't have the?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much for the clarification. I am just handing over to Saab from Call Earth to ask the question. Just bear with me.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
My internet's not very good, so I have actually written the question down for Francisca if it doesn't come out. So I just want to say thank you very much for the presentation, and we are members of the scheme. And I was just going to say the legal language on the website makes the scheme look very academic, and I just wondered if there was any way that you could just maybe walk everyone through, you know, just what on a very practical level, what a recruitment process would look like. You know, what would we need to change? What would we need to update? You know, what you know, would it be our recruitment policy? Would it be our referencing policy? And just what you've already sent us a form actually on what a reference request would look like. So I think it would be quite helpful just to see what the process would look like.
Thank you, Sarb. And yeah, thank you for joining. And yeah, that's a really good question. And I agree that the language used in the scheme is quite heavy and very legal indeed. So let me run you through how it's changed your recruitment process. So after you sign up to the scheme, you will have to look if your current either HR team or referencing team has the capacity to look at the statement of conduct, which I've shared. Actually, let me share it again. To make it easier for you. Wait a second. Yeah. So you can now see hopefully the statement of conduct. So you should look if your existing team, who is usually doing the reference checks for you, has the capacity to make sure that they can include this form. So as I said before, you could either use this form separately, or you could include the questions which you can see on this slide in your existing reference form. So before you start implementing, you should also look at your recruitment policy and referencing policy, because you might want to include more information about being a part of the scheme and implementing it. You also should think about how to inform both candidates and also your existing staff about the scheme. So I would suggest sending a communication to all staff that you've signed up to this scheme and you are now part of it, and you will be using statement of conduct for all your references. I would also suggest preparing your new communications, which will go to the website, to the recruiting application, or whatever you are using to run your recruitments, because you need to make sure that you have the consent of the candidate. So you need to, usually there is this tick box which the candidate is ticking, saying that, yeah, they are happy for you to ask for references. So this is a great opportunity for you to inform them. We are now part of the Misconduct Disclosure Scheme. We will be asking those questions. You can also include a link to the SCHR website so that the candidate can go and look for more information. And this also helps you in case of any issues. We haven't had any, but just in case, you've asked for consent and you can now request and share the data. And then when you have everything in place, so you've looked at your policies, you know that your team has the capacity to ask and provide the data from the statement of conduct, because this is the main commitment of that scheme. And you are also confident that you can inform everyone involved that you are doing that and that you are part of the scheme. You will be ready for implementation. I would also just like to flag that it's key really to look at the implementation data, and keeping in mind that you need to report it to us every year, because we had an issue when the organization wasn't sure about that and they started tracking the data a bit later when they started, and so they had to backtrack a huge really amount of numbers. So it's very good to make sure that you are prepared and that you can track the numbers which you have to share with us. So those were the number of recruitments you are running, the number of times you are asking the questions from the statement of conduct, excuse me, the number of answers you are receiving, and everything else. This is also available on our website, and I will include it in the information which we will be sending after this webinar. So what we found out is that very often what takes really long is to make sure that if your organization is working not only in the UK, but also in other countries, if you are present there, you will have to double check if you are legally allowed to use the statement of conduct. You can ask, I mean, it's not really about asking those questions because you can always ask. It's more about really answering those questions. But this is when you are disclosing the data, which could be sensitive, which is sensitive and could be illegal actually. So this takes time, and this is something very important to make sure you have in place before starting implementing the scheme. And that's why, as I said before, some organizations start implementing from the center of their organization to see, you know, just what they need to make sure that this is working, that they can monitor, that they have all legal advice they need. So yes, I think that depending of the size of the organization and depending if you are working in the UK only or also abroad, it's slightly different. Because if you are working also abroad, there is this additional legal check which you have to do before implementing. If not, we are confident that you can implement in the UK without any additional legal check. Although in line with the GDPR, you are required to do the data protection assessment, and for the UK based organizations, this is available on our website and you can use it to run your own assessment. And then when you are ready to implement, I would suggest that it's good to check with your referencing team every now and then. How is it working in practice? Because yeah, I mean, in theory, it's just adding some questions to your reference checks, but in practice, that might create quite a lot of additional workload. And it's also worth having some space to just refresh the knowledge about the scheme, making sure that the team is aware, why are we doing that, what are the requirements, what needs to be done at the end of every year, because very often it's the HR or referencing team who is not only asking and giving the references, they are also generating the numbers for the reports which we need at the end of the year. And then I should probably mention that since the scheme is still new, it was implemented only in last year. If there were any recommendations you have or your HR or referencing team have during the implementation period, I would be very grateful if you could send them to me. We have annual meetings of the signatory organizations as well. And we are looking into issues, we are looking into challenges, and we are trying to make sure that we can work on it together and address any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Ines. I hope that has helped illustrate a little bit more what it looks like in practice. I had a few more questions come in through the chat. One of them was a follow-up question to the GDPR assessment. So the legal conclusion which you mentioned is already on your website and organizations can access this. There was a question on whether you also have this in a format where it includes the legal citations, so really goes back to the clauses, or the information that is needed to actually make the assessment within organizations. And the follow-up question to that was, there is legal conclusions made relating to non-GDPR countries. Do you have that for other countries? And can that be shared if you do have it? So that was the legal question. I'm just going to go through 3 other questions that I received, and maybe you could take them in turn, Ines. Sure. So the first one was, when participating agencies communicated to their staff that they were signing up to the scheme, do you know anything on what the reaction was? Can you speak a little bit about that? And a related question on whether participating agencies use the scheme for former staff that they are asked to give references for as well. And then the last question was on whether you have any guidance for organizations on how best to communicate recruitment outcomes if someone has been rejected. So do you have any guidance on how to let the individual know who has applied for the role if they weren't successful as a result of the scheme on the basis of either negative or absent misconduct data?
Thank you so much, Franziska. So the first question is a very good question, but the one related to the non-GDPR countries, I have to say that I'm not a lawyer and I'm not sure, so I will have to double check and go back to the person who asked it afterwards, sorry. And then the consent to the staff about signing up to the scheme and the reaction. So I think, to be honest, I haven't heard about any reactions which were not supportive of signing up to the scheme. I know that very often staff looks at this as an additional tool which is strengthening the organization's capacity. And I haven't heard any feedback except for the fact that it was sent. There were some questions. Very often there were some webinars, or maybe some, if it's a small organization, of course, some one-to-ones with staff where, you know, if there were any additional questions, they were answered. But except for that, I haven't heard anything really. And then there was a question about former staff, which I've missed, sorry.
No problem at all. So the question was whether the scheme is used for former staff that they are asked to give a reference for. So this is about providing the reference as opposed to asking for the reference.
Yes. So yes, yes, the scheme should be used for the former staff, because when you sign up to the scheme, you commit to use the scheme at all times. So if you are giving references, you are committed to answer the statement of conduct questions if you are being asked. So now, if the former staff is being recruited by another signatory organization, they will use the statement of conduct and you will be asked those questions. If the former staff is being employed by a non-signatory organization, they most probably won't ask you those questions unless they have some of them in their reference request form. So I know that there were some questions about what does it mean for me, and if it's a former staff who already left sorry, can I disclose those information? And yes, of course you can, because the candidate gave the consent to the recruiting organization. I hope this answers your question. And then there was another question on, oh yeah, guidance about how to best communicate the rejection to the candidate. So the short answer is no, I don't have it, but I could look into it. And I would suspect that the majority of the signatory organizations have some sort of a template they are using, and you probably can just include additional clause saying that in line with the misconduct disclosure scheme, we found out that you either committed some misconduct or there are gaps which you can't talk to. But I mean, if someone signs up to the scheme and has such questions, this is why we are trying to make sure that we have contact points, for example, for HR teams, because then we can put you in touch with someone who we know has such template and can share it with you and just support you with building your own capacity to develop such a form.
Thank you, Ines. I had another question come in which relates to the legal advice, and the question was whether each organization has to seek their own legal advice in the countries in which they work, or can legal advice be shared? So many organizations will of course work in the same countries, and I guess this goes about, you know, can organizations avoid duplication of effort by sharing that legal advice? I obviously understand you're not a lawyer, so it would be great to hear if you know whether that has happened in the past, or whether it might be a possibility in the future. And then just another follow-up question, which was, what happens if a candidate does not consent to have the checks done? Have you had any experience on that with your existing signatories?
Thank you. So for the first question with the legal advice, actually this is something that I've been trying to to collate and make sure that it's available. Unfortunately, due to some legal implication which the shared advice could have for legal teams, very often it's not possible to share the full legal advice. And so far, no one agreed to share the full legal advice. I was also looking at some external legal advisors, because if the legal advice proves to be wrong, then you could use it to sue the lawyers. I mean, I would never do that personally, but I think I'm not a lawyer, so I just don't understand how big the risk is possibly. But no, unfortunately, we don't have a full legal advice related to some of the countries, so we can't share it because no one agreed and gave us their consent to do so. But I think it's again, it will be, perhaps it could help to join the legal task force, which is created among the signatory organization, and just follow up and have some conversations about what's possible when it comes to legal advice. And then there was a question about candidates who is not giving you their consent. So to be fair, if I would be recruiting someone and they wouldn't give me their consent for checking recruitments, it would be a really huge red flag for me, because why wouldn't you do that? I mean, it's such a common practice right now to ask for references that no, it's usually just means that you are not even being longlisted. And there have been such situations, but usually it's just automatically being rejected.
Thank you. And just a follow-up question on former staff. So in the event an organization signs up and agrees to make disclosures as part of the scheme, and the organization is aware that a former member of staff who had a disciplinary action for misconduct is now working elsewhere, do you have any advice about contacting the organization to update a reference that was already provided?
Thank you. My advice would be to contact the organization and let them know about the misconduct if you know about it. I mean, I know that this is not as easy as I would like it to be, because again, there are some legal implications if you decide to take such a step, but I really think that this should be something that everyone is doing. And also, to be honest, you are acting in the interest of greater good by disclosing such information. So I would encourage everyone to just go back to that organization and share this information, although I'm quite sure that your legal team won't agree with me.
Thank you, Ines. That's also helpful. I just wanted to come back to all participants to see if there were any other questions. We haven't received any further questions in the chat. Or alternatively, if anyone of the participants has already signed up to the scheme and has some experience to share, then it would also be interesting to hear about that. So if you do want to come in at this point, please let me know by raising your hand.
I think Sarb is raising her hand.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
We can. Thank you, Sab.
Sorry about another question, but I just wanted to ask you, what about disclosing spent disciplinaries, so of a non-sexual misconduct nature? So if somebody's had a disciplinary for, you know, first written warning for, I don't know, taking money out for petty cash, and it was several years ago, so that would be destroyed in every HR folder. What would we need to disclose that?
So what I would say is that in line with the scheme, you don't have to disclose that, because the scheme is not, it doesn't contain such question. But what I would suggest is that, first of all, you can always include some additional information when you give a reference, and you know, very often the referencing form includes some questions, as would you hire this candidate again? Yes, no, why? So I would encourage everyone to disclose such information, because again, this will help better inform the decision of the recruiting organization, and this will give them a chance to actually, you know, just be aware of the issues that there were with some employee, and just, yeah, this way you will make sure that they can just have access to all those information. And then you've said that this, after some period of time, this is being destroyed and is no longer kept on the HR files. So I'm not sure how long the files should be kept in the UK, to be honest. But I think very often such information are kept longer. I'm not sure what's the practice.
I think an employee is allowed to ask for anything. So if somebody's had a written warning for a year, and your policy says it's a year, an employee can ask for it to be removed from their personnel file. So it's a question of then having these background information, this background data.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, personally, as long as I would have access to such information, because you obviously can't remember all staff which ask you to remove such information, although I think they should all be disclosed.
Okay.
Sorry, that's not very helpful, but
I had another question actually.
Yes,
what do we do about employees? So if we employ somebody for a couple of months and we dismiss them because of misconduct issues, and that employee then doesn't put that they worked for us on their LinkedIn or their CV, so they remove all reference from having worked with us. But we know that this person is now going to work in Oxfam, for example. Are we legally obliged, or are we obliged under the scheme to contact Oxfam and say, you know, you didn't take a reference from me, but I know that this employee is now working for you? So we're not allowed to do that under sort of normal rules, I guess, for employment.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think that one, legally, you're not allowed to do that. Secondly, this should be something that Oxfam should, I mean, using your example, if this person applies for Oxfam, Oxfam should make sure that they look closely at their CV. And as I've said before, the 34 staff who was dismissed was partly dismissed because of gaps in their CVs. So this will be such a gap, and then if you ask the candidate and they are not willing to answer your question, and of course they can lie, it happens. I've had such situations, so it's not always easy to find out. But in theory, Oxfam could be able to find out that there is a gap and just follow up with the candidate. Personally, to be honest, I would probably try to contact the hiring organization, although this is not legal, but I will just feel obliged to share some information. But this is not easy, and the legal challenges afterwards could be huge, because but you know, from the other side, looking at it, what could happen in the worst case scenario is that the candidate could sue you for defamation. But looking at this case, the fact that you will be disclosing that they were involved in misconduct will be again in the interest of greater good. So I don't think that anyone will really ask you to pay any fines for this, but I'm not a lawyer, so I would recommend taking some legal advice on such issues.
Thank you.
Ines, one more question that has just come in, which was, do organizations have to use the exact template that you have shown in your presentation? Or can organizations incorporate most of the questions into existing systems or formats, or into their existing, you know, recruitment process as such?
So the short answer is yes, although I would like to follow up on the use of the word most, because while you are allowed to just use the template of statement of conduct and merge it with your existing reference request template, you have to ask all those questions. And even if the organization is not, I mean, one of the questions is optional, the one about the ongoing investigation. But I would still say that it's better to always ask such question, because maybe someone will be willing to answer, and maybe this will help you make a better hiring decision, because you will learn something that you wouldn't learn otherwise. So yes, you are welcome to merge the statement of conduct with your existing reference request form, but I would encourage everyone to use all questions.
That's really helpful, thank you. Actually, a quick question from me, if you don't mind. You've spoken a lot about sort of the process of giving, of requesting the information during your recruitment. I wondered if you have any examples from organizations who signed up around answering the question when they're asked. So, you know, do you have any, have they experienced any difficulty? Have they sort of, you know, have there been any challenges that organizations faced? And I don't know if you could speak a little bit about that, sort of the other side of the referencing process.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Francisca. So yeah, I mean, this is the tricky part, because this is the part when you are disclosing information which is sensitive. But what I found out is that even if someone is disclosing some data about the misconduct, there are absolutely no issues. At times there were some additional legal advice taken, but so far we had no challenges or issues whatsoever coming as a result of the information which were shared. And I think, as I said before, very often your referencing team has a really vast knowledge about what's legally allowed and what's not allowed. And when the scheme was developed, we had a group of lawyers working on it. So in the scheme itself, there is a legal explanation of, there is a legal explanation of why the only optional question, which is about ongoing investigation, doesn't have to be asked at all times, because the lawyers who prepared the scheme were confident that you can ask and answer all other questions. So no, as far as I know, there were no issues. And then again, the candidate is giving the requesting organization their consent to ask. So when you are answering such a request, you have the consent of the candidate to disclose everything you know.
Great, thank you so much. I thought that Karen had a question. Karen, do you please come in with your question?
Thank you. We basically, our model is supporting people. So we engage consultants to work for us. Now we try to have long-term relationships with these consultants, but we're using them on quite short assignments. I'm just wondering if you have any ideas about how this scheme might be relevant, help us to help organisations be aware where there might have been problems, or for us to be made aware where there are problems. We work on organisational development and MEL.
Thank you, Karen. Actually, this is something that I forgot to mention, so thanks a lot for your question. So the scheme, as it is right now, and it says so in the scheme, is not applicable to consultants, because the process of hiring consultants is different from your usual recruiting practice. It's more of a procurement process. And I mean, what is the most challenging is that the requirement of the scheme is for you to ask for references for the past 5 years. So when you look at consultants, this is just impossible very often. And I know that some organizations have tried to use the scheme when it comes to consultants as well, because it helps you. It just helps you learn more and make sure that you have good references in place, and that you are not hiring any abusers, and that you are making a good decision. And I know that some consultants just refused and they said that it's too much work to list all their employees for the past 5 years, which I understand, to be honest. On the other side, I really think that perhaps there is more work for us as a CHR to do and look into making this into a new normal. And then we will just, you know, when this is something common, everyone will be ready to just make sure that they list all their employees. But at this moment, we can't really share any advice on consultancies, although I would encourage you to make sure that your reference check is as detailed as possible, because when you're a consultant, it's very easy to just hide some parts of your employment. There is just so many costs you are holding. I know this is not very helpful, but this is an issue which was flagged to me lately, and yeah, I don't have fixed answer yet.
Thank you, Ines. I wondered if, you know, having heard that some organizations have attempted to use the scheme for consultants, I wondered if, you know, there are possibilities to use elements of the scheme, even, you know, if you're signatory, obviously it would cover staff only, but then to use certain elements that you feel is possible to use as part of the scheme for recruitment or for engagement of consultants. Do you have any experience of that at all?
Yes, so I would definitely say that you could even use the whole scheme. I mean, all of the questions, because that's not the problem. The problem is with the requirement to check back at least 5 years of your employment. And yeah, it's just apparently too much. And that's why the scheme was not developed for the consultancies at this point. But if you think it's feasible for a consultant which is applying for a job with your organization, and if you are signed up to the scheme, yes, please use it. Just, you know, it's always worth trying, and it really can strengthen your recruitment process. But at the same time, I understand that it might not be possible in all time, especially when you are hiring a consultant which needs to be deployed urgently, and you need to do the reference checks and make sure that everything is in place. Although this can be solved by using the conditional contract, so that you say that you are giving this contract to the employee, but if you find out something later on in the reference checks, you have the right to just end the employment. But this is still not something that's officially included in the scheme, because yeah, it was not included in the revision this year, so I can't really ask signatory organizations to do that. But I would recommend that still.
Thank you, that's hugely helpful. We're coming towards the end of the webinar, so I just wanted to ask if anyone has any other questions that you would like addressed or that you would like to raise at this point. I can, yes, Karen, please do come in, Karen.
Okay, your answer was very, very helpful. I think probably there are organizations out there that are, so we like to build up a relationship with somebody that we're then providing to our clients. So maybe there is some way of actually building on that, getting together with other organizations that are working in the same sort of way, though most of them are probably not necessarily in the not-for-profit space. But there may be a way of looking at building relationships that will provide something similar for the consultancy sector. Just a thought.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. It's a really good thought. Yeah, I will look at this in more details, and I will try to include something in the information we'll be sending after the webinar, if I will manage to find something.
It's more that I just want to make sure that if we are working with somebody, we're not putting anyone at risk, or we're not trying to find ways of actually making sure that we've done as many checks as we can. So,
yeah, and that's, yeah, also.
Ines, I have another question that came up in the chat, which was if you know of any legal challenges that were brought to the scheme in the UK. I think you mentioned this briefly in your presentation, but could you just say again whether you are aware of any former employees suing over the scheme being used?
No, not in the UK. I mean, no, wait. What I wanted to say that no, I was not aware of any employee suing anyone because of the organization using the scheme, but I'm confident that there will be really no basis to sue you in the UK, especially. I mean, even if you think about the defamation, if someone was proven to be involved in some misconduct, then this is not really defamation, this is just information sharing. So I don't think anyone would sue your organization for disclosing such information, especially, I mean, but then again, before signing up to the scheme, you really should look at your investigation processes and you should look what you have in place. And if you have all tools and materials you need to run, and the resources as well, to run an investigation and make sure that it's transparent and fair.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much. Just asking once more if anyone else wants to come in with any further questions, either in the chat or by raising your hand. We've got about 5 minutes left for any final questions. Ines, just to say, there's just another question that came in through the chat, and the question is whether you could advise on how the scheme might work where historic reports are received, but references were not requested from the hiring organization. So is there any provision or any recommendation, for example, when you sign up to the scheme, does it include a recommendation and commitment to share safeguarding concerns, even if the hiring organization did not request a reference at the time? Sorry, this was a long question, so I hope you captured it all.
Yeah, I'm just looking at it. Thank you, in the chat box, actually. So I think this is similar to the other question which was asked already. I'm just looking, sorry. So yeah, I think it's similar. It's just talking about the instance where you have not given a reference for a candidate which was working for you. Or is it more about when you are hiring the candidate and you don't have the reference? I'm not sure, to be honest.
Sarah, did you want to come in and ask your question?
Sorry.
Yes, please. Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Hi. Sorry, my question wasn't terribly clear, but I guess it just in signing up to the scheme, does it kind of, is there an understanding and an agreement that basically this is about sharing if there's safeguarding concerns, you know, if there's a person who's within the sector who's possibly trying to move around the sector, you know, it's part about our obligation and our duty to make sure that they don't cause any further harm. So I suppose, like, you're very much reliant on employers doing their due diligence and making sure that they're doing appropriate reference checking and everything like that. But if there's a situation where, you know, an organization is not contacted and it becomes apparent that somebody who's a person of concern is employed elsewhere, does the scheme support or give guidance or recommendation about, you know, our commitment and our obligation to safeguard by preventing that person or making the other employer aware of the concerns? Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
And actually, yeah, this was flagged to me before about, you know, organization just being aware that someone who committed misconduct moved on and they were never asked for references and they just all of a sudden see this person somewhere else. So unfortunately, SCHR has no power to do anything really in this situation. And yeah, I mean, this was flagged to me and this is something that I need to address, but to be honest, considering the law really and what you can do, it might be impossible. And I'm not entirely sure if you can give references if you have not been asked to. I know that some organizations are just doing it, taking the potential legal risk and just sharing the reference. I mean, afterwards, after the recruitment process was finished, really, if they found out that something like that happened. But this is not a common practice, I think, although I would really encourage everyone to do so if that's possible, and if you think that this can change something.
I guess it'd be just on a case-by-case basis, just bearing in mind that people can easily omit previous employers that they've had difficulties with from their CVs. So yeah, no, thanks for that. Thanks for that answer. And thanks for the presentation. It's been very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, everyone. And especially to Ines for the really detailed presentation, for the really insightful comments, and also for sharing some of the practical experience that you have had with your signatories. And I can see that we still have a few questions come in on the chat. We are ever so slightly running out of time. So my suggestion is that we pick up these questions and we will answer them after the webinar. So rest assured that we have the record of your questions and we will come back to you. I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar that we would very much appreciate your feedback on how you found the webinar, whether it was useful for you and whether you have learned something. So I would be very grateful if you could take some time to go to our feedback questionnaire and give us some feedback on what you've learned and whether it was useful for you, and most importantly, whether there is anything else that we can do in the future. I'm just putting the link back into the chat for you to access. I noticed that you can't actually click on it, and I don't know why, so you would have to copy and paste the link into your browser for providing feedback. With that said and done, I'm just wanted to say one more thank you to Ines. It's been incredibly useful. Thank you for the time preparing for the webinar and for the time in answering all of the questions in so much detail. And I hope it hasn't felt like a grilling for you. I've most certainly learned a lot. So thank you very much, Ines, again for your time.
Yeah, and I would like just to say thank you to you, Franziska, and Bond Network for organizing this, really, and many, many thanks to all participants. And it's great to see there is such interest in the scheme. And just if you have any questions at all, just please let me know. Contact me. I will send out my contact information after this webinar and some additional materials. So just feel free to drop me an email and check with me. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And just to add that we will share all of the materials after the webinar, and for any follow-up questions, just get in touch with either me or Ines. So thank you, everyone, and speak to you soon.